Number 10, BLOODSTORM. Now, Storm is already mistress of the elements, so quite powerful and quite interesting. But what happens when she becomes a vampire? Now, this has happened briefly in main continuity, but in the Mutant X universe, it became a permanent change. The Mutant X comic series was published from 1998 to 2001, and as mentioned, it saw a very different Storm. This was after she was bitten by Dracula. Here, she was not saved, but instead became a full-fledged creature of the night. She, of course, had vows not to kill, so she had the vampire dilemma, which she solved by hiring some of her former teammates to let her drink from them, like Kitty Pryde. She would eventually leave the X-Men and join a team called the Six. She also turns Gambit into a vampire, even though she warns him he'll regret it, and he does. Spoilers. Listen when people warn you. BLOODSTORM became a breakout character of this series. Number 9, New Sun Gambit. Speaking of Gambit, let's take a look at one of his alternate versions. This is New Sun Gambit, and he hails from Earth 9921. Gambit actually has enormous power potential that was quashed by Mr. Sinister in the main continuity, but that continuity is not all. In this other universe, he was trained to use his abilities even before he had them, and then when this was combined with his full potential and a mystic ceremony, he became something else altogether. The only thing is, the awakening of all these abilities would create a shockwave that would destroy his Earth, forcing him to travel around, and of course he ended up on the 616 Earth, where he ended up befriending Gambit and trying to help him along his way, but didn't tell him who he was. It was after his reveal and Gambit's subsequent disgust that he changed his name to New Sun. Some fans like seeing the full unleashed potential on display of Gambit. Number 8, Basilisk. Not all alternate versions that people like have happy outcomes. Case in point, Basilisk from Earth 11326, an Earth also known as Age of X. Here, Cyclops was incarcerated in a mutants-only facility after the manifestation of his powers as a teenager killed several people, including his parents. He captured the attention of the prison warden Arcade because of his power set, so he made him this very special mask. It looks a lot like the Skull mask from Persona 5, and it's something that people like about this character. In fact, for many, it's what makes him cooler. It is a very menacing looking mask. Now, a lot of this universe had to do with Legion, one of its personalities, and manifesting another world. So for some, it was just a cool concept in general. The mask looked great. Love the mask. Number 7, Natasha Stark. Let's go over a blip of an alternate universe. One that is more cool if you are a Stony shipper than anything else. Stony being the pairing of Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. Let me explain. I know some of you are already clicking off, but it's fine because all parts of fandom are valid. This universe is a sweet nod to the boon and transformative fandom that happened after the Civil War comic arc of 2006. This arc dealt with the pro versus anti-registration sides of superheroing. This was after a disastrous superheroing event goes wrong, featuring the New Warriors, which leaves many dead, including 60 children. This arc would decimate Tony and Steve's friendship, and before this they had been besties, and so some fans felt that it hadn't been the best executed and they weren't that happy with it. And so these fans took to fandom and fan fiction to create what are called fix-its. They wanted to make the universe like it was again. Friends. But for many, this ended up ballooning into a ship, and it became one of the dominant pairings of the fandom until the MCU, and till the end of the line, until not. Nah. With all that established, let's talk about Natasha Stark from Earth 3490. This is a female Tony who averts civil war by marrying Steve. Oh yes, because their feelings tended that way already, and the only difference was that Tony was a woman in this universe. Okay, sure Jan, I see you. Again, this was a blip, but for many shippers, a ha! I knew it moment. Whenever a part of your fandom is acknowledged in a fun way, it's always a good day. Fandom positivity is pretty cool. Number 6, Old Man Logan. Would any of our nerd lists be complete without mentioning Old Man Logan? Yes they would, but it just keeps coming up. It's a staple here on Top 10 Nerd. Well, this story is one of the most popular alternate universe stories out there, and it has a famously gross confrontation between the Hulk and Wolverine, or Logan, because he's not Wolverine anymore in this story. Here we have a grizzled old man Logan fighting his way across a supervillain-controlled America, trying to keep his claws sheathed after what he did, which, spoilers, was somehow managing to kill most of the X-Men. This was because he fell for an illusion created by Mysterio. This is a must-read for many fans and a fave Wolverine story for others. Number 5, Spider Side. Midway through, yet another clone. The clone saga would have been pretty disappointing if it hadn't given us what its name implied. clones. Many clones. When Spider-Side emerged from the Jackal's pod, he was convinced that he was Peter Parker. When he was confronted with all these other versions who were already out, he decided that he was gonna prove that he was the one and only by being as homicidal as possible. He became obsessed with proving that he was the real Peter Parker. He was unstable and violent and had been designed to kill the original Peter Parker. His name comes from the fact that it said that he was willing to commit Spider-Side, so mass homicide of Spider-Mans. Now some of you may be wondering, why Spider-Side and not Cain with his hand that he put on people's faces and do the Mark of Cain thing? There was something classically menacing about Spider-Side, from his simplicity to his size. And such a back-to-basics baddie worked for some fans, and made him a rather cool addition to all these clones running around out there. Number 4, WITCHBREED. For this we have to go for Neil Gaiman of Sandman fame's 1602 Marvel Comics contribution. It is also an alternate universe story. In this universe, the Marvel universe is all happening by Elizabethan times, 1602. There, mutants exist, but they are known as WITCHBREED. This is because they are thought to be the spawn of demons or witches. Or both. They are creatures to be hunted down, but they find safe haven in Xavier's Select College for Sons of Gentlefolk, a school that causes great concern for Sir Nicholas Fury because he sees the potential of all of these students as soldiers, which, let's not lie, that's part of what Xavier is doing. Again, this is a universe where people tend to like the whole thing, but the X-Men stand out as a distinct part, or rather, the WITCHBREED. Number 3, Capwolf. Yes, I'm serious, Capwolf. Capwolf is a bit of a joke. In fact, the arc that he first debuts in is meant to be a slight tongue-in-cheek reference parody of an other story arc that was going on, but that fell flat, not only for modern readers, but for readers at the time. In fact, it had to be explained, and that's never a good sign. Capwolf is what it sounds like. Captain America as a werewolf. And as silly as it is, it's also awesome. And it would be reused years later whenever they need to do like a creature feature. We need Frankencastle, we need Capwolf, we need somebody to be a vampire, we got choices. Something about a wolf parading around in Cap's costume with his shield is just, it's fun. It's a fun time. Especially if you just want to go with it. So if you like just going with it, this alternate version may be for you. Number 2, Earth X. The version of the X-Men here are depressing. But all of Earth X is depressing actually. After an experiment of Reed Richards goes wrong, or seemingly that's what happened, for once it's not Reed's fault, I know, shock and awe, a population of superpowered beings is produced all over the Earth, and the world drastically alters. To quote The Incredibles, when everyone's super, no one is. Suddenly there's not as much of a reason to hate and fear the X-Men, and they've largely fallen apart. The one character people tend to remember the most that sticks out when they first think of this is Wolverine, who's got a beer gut and is married to Jean Grey, except it's not Jean, it's Madeline Pryor, but he keeps calling her Jean, and it's just sad. Now, how exactly is this cooler, you may be asking? Well, it's all in the depiction. It's unique, it's memorable, and part of a well-received work. So for many, that's what makes it cool. And finally, in at number 1, Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. If you thought people loved Vampire Storm, then you know that they enjoy Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine has been a vampire more than once. You have what-if stories like the aforementioned Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. But you also have arcs like Curse of the Mutants, which would also be the arc that left Jubilee as a vampire for a bit. Many have fond memories of the What If story, where upon successfully turning Storm, Dracula then turns all the rest of the X-Men. Only because of Wolverine's healing factor, he figures out how to use his powers way faster than everybody else, and so he dethrones Dracula and takes over as leader of the vampires. In fact, he leads the new vampire X-Men to take over New York. It's up to the bizarre combination of Doctor Strange and the Punisher to take him down. Number 10. Spider-Punk. Let's start off with a more obscure alternate, shall we? But one with quite the look. Spikes will never die, nor will the punk aesthetic. The spirit may be something else, but that's a discussion for another day. Spider-Punk is Hobart Brown from Earth 138 and comes to us from the Spider-Verse event of 2014. But he appeared in 2015. The Spider-Verse was an event where Spider-Man met so many alternate versions of himself because there were spider totems. Being a spider person was now like an assignment from a spider god type thing. They were being hunted down by spider vampires. Mileage varies on the plot itself, but people really like the alternates. And there was pretty much all the kinds that you could conceive. For Hobart, he was a homeless teen bitten by a radioactive spider, well, irradiated in a toxic waste dump. He becomes a punk rock version of Spider-Man, with a guitar, leading the downtrodden people against President Norman Osborn. And he would be recruited to join the army of Spider-Men. For many, they just love the concept of a punk rock Spider-Man. And the images are all very fun. Sneakers, jean vests, head spikes in the form of a mohawk. There's always time for fashion. Number 9, Spider Assassin from Earth 8351. This is an alternate version of Peter Parker. He first appeared in a What If story, What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine #1. In this universe, you had very much the same Peter Parker until he fought Wolverine. Then everything completely diverged and he ended up being trained by him and becoming an assassin. Cold-blooded assassin. No more friendly neighborhood Spider-Man over here. Fans of a darker, harder-edged Peter tend to gravitate towards characters like Spider Assassin. His costume, again, is also cool. And of course has black accents rather than blue because he's edgy. In this universe, he left Mary Jane for a woman named Alex who looked almost exactly like Gwen Stacy and also died. Don't look like Gwen Stacy. He would be recruited into the Spider-Verse event alongside original characters like Spider-Punk. He wouldn't make it though. So much spider carnage in that event. Number 8, Man-Spider. One of Spider-Man's consistent fears is being overwhelmed by Spider-Man, and nowhere does this happen more literally than when he starts to mutate into Man-Spider. This is because his DNA could be viewed as in flux. Just a little bit of a nudge sends him more down that path to his mutagenic nightmare. That was the name of one of the arcs where this happened. The full-blown Man-Spider is credited to the 90s animated series. As before that in comics, he got 6 arms, but it was something that was dealt with pretty quickly, and also that was the same issue where he met Morbius, fun fact. In the comics, the transformation tends to be triggered by meddling, people messing with his DNA, and less so because that's just the way he's going. One big devolution, or evolution, depending upon how you look at it, happened in the Savage Land, because anything can happen in the Savage Land. Rogue can make out with people in the Savage Land. Number 7, Soldier Supreme. Here we have an amalgamated character from Warp World. This was the universe that was created when Gamora had the Infinity Gauntlet, put everybody's souls into the Soul Gem, and then folded that universe in half. As a result of this, the characters were merged and fused together. So you have Marvel characters smushed, and one of those was Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange. So I mean, they kind of already had the same name, just spelled differently, so it made it a bit easier. Back there, Dr. Stephen Rogers, but now with a PH. Their stories actually don't fuse too badly. It's World War II, and Stephen Rogers is contracted for a super secret soldier experiment, only it turns out it's a cover for a mystical ceremony instead of for, you know, the scientific one that he actually undergoes. But these mystic rituals still end up enhancing his strength and allowing him to connect with the occult, and he becomes Soldier Supreme. So he has Cap's cowl, but he still has like a mustache. And he was actually one of the heroes who objected to Warp World being completely destroyed at the end of the arc by Adam Warlock. So Warlock found a way to let it still exist and let these characters still exist. It was one of those loopholes. Stephen Rogers did that and kept being a hero. Number 6, Superior Spider-Man. A controversial pick for some, as there were some fans who absolutely loathed this arc. And it is a rather different kind of alternate because all of this is happening in the main verse in the body of main verse Peter. But let me explain. The mind. The mind is that of Dr. Octopus, who tricked Peter Parker to coming to him and then swapped with him while he was dying so that Peter's mind was trapped in his dying corpse body. For some reason, some fans were worried that this was going to be permanent, which, I don't know, I mean, is anything? Life. It obviously ended up not being, and there was a kernel of Peter's consciousness that was left and then ended up unfurling and took back over eventually. However, some were fans of the villainous Doc Ock trying to be a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man himself. From the army of spider robots patrolling the city, to a sassy Spider-Man who a disturbing amount of his comrades couldn't identify wasn't the real Peter. For some fans, the Superior Spider-Man as an arc has earned its place as a favorite. Superior Spider-Man is still around, but it's not the same. Number 5, Super Soldier. When it comes to amalgam universes and characters, you've got choices, but we're gonna go with the original, the classic that fused characters from DC and Marvel together, and the imprint was actually called Amalgam Comics. They made a little one for a year to publish these. This happened after a series of lead-up versus fights. The characters would find themselves smooshed together. One of these fusions was Super Soldier, the combination of Superman and Captain America. The name's a bit on the nose, but what's he gonna do? This character debuted in 1996. Again, as I said in my Batman crossovers vid, the 90s loved a good crossover. So here in this universe, the super soldier serum was derived from DNA taken from a dead alien, because why not? What else are you gonna do with a dead alien? They gave this formula along with solar radiation to a young Clark Kent, who then developed abilities because of it and became a super soldier. So there's not much Steve Rogers in the name, but there's some in the backstory. Not all fusions are seamless. It's an odd world when you fuse better years later with Doctor Strange. But this fusion is iconic, and it's a symbol of more cordial times between the American Big Two. Number 4, Spider-Man Noir. If there's one thing Marvel loves, it's an alternate universe story where the characters exist in another time period or genre, and Spider-Man Noir gives you both. Spider-Man Noir came into the world in 2009, and it gave the world a Peter Parker who was from 1933 and also from a Pulp Fiction style universe. A Peter Parker bitten by an illegally imported venomous spider. Now, Spider-Man Noir was not the only noir story to be created by Marvel, but it was one of the ones that blended the concepts together the best. They just kind of worked well together. The Into the Spider-Verse animated film also increased interest and fondness for this character, particularly his perplexedness over Rubik's Cubes, monochromatism. The Spider-Man Noir comic would get a spin-off and then the character would become part of the Spider-Verse event, but I mean, who wasn't? Number 3, X-Babies. Versions of your favorite characters as babies or kids. This is a concept that is either really fun or incredibly lame, depending upon who you're talking to. So the X-Babies are clones created by Mojo in the Mojoverse. This was probably inspired by an even earlier story where he had just taken the X-Men and turned them into kids, again for entertainment. Because you know, if anything goes on long enough, be it show, series, whatever, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get a child episode and you're gonna get a musical episode. Now the X-Babies are a concept that is short-lived, but they are usually returned to. There is even an A-Babies versus X-Babies. Again, how cool you'll find these tots depends upon your tolerance for baby-related shenanigans. Number 2, Miles Morales. A character who predates the Spider-Verse by a couple of years. He debuted in Ultimate Fallout number 4 in 2011, and is one of the more fondly remembered elements of the 1610 universe, or the Ultimate Universe. He is also an excellent example of transitioning a character, one handled with respect for the original and also for the new character. Miles took up the mantle of Spider-Man after Peter Parker in his universe was killed. He struggled for a bit to find his footing and his own identity, but once he did, he created a rich tapestry of his own. So much so that he was one of the few characters to be imported when the Ultimate Universe was, well, ultimately collapsed. We just imported what we wanted into the 616 mainverse. It's a thing, it happens. Miles was a successful legacy character because in his universe that's what he was. Now what is he? Another Spider-Man running around, but it's fine, we have multiples of everybody running around. Yeah. And in at number 1, Spider-Man 2099. The future. It can be a hard concept to pull off and make cool and credible, but the steampunk-esque adventure that was Spider-Man 2099 pulled it off. Meet Miguel O'Hara, who worked at an evil, because of course they were, corporation called Alchemax. Miguel is a geneticist who is trying to recreate the powers of Spider-Man for the company. That is until he learned a little bit more about them and then he wanted out. Well, when they heard that, they got him addicted to an illegal drug that they were the only people who could legally distribute it. So if he didn't get it from them, he was getting it from the street, and that meant he had to be arrested, so he was trapped. Well, in order to try and get out of this, he realized he had left his genetic code inside of the machine, so he tried to revert to that earlier level of his DNA, but ended up turning himself into a Spider-Man in the process. Yes. Spider-Man 2099 was one of the more fully fleshed out of the 2099 pantheon, and certainly one of the better remembered. Plus, as always, I've said it so many times on this video, but it's still true, costume is iconic. Also has the original colors that the person who pitched the Venom suit wanted, so that's another fun fact. It can make or break a character's appeal. Number 10, Steel Corpse from Age of X. Iron Man is now a household name thanks largely to the MCU. And the Iron Man film in 2008 that started it off. Believe it or not, before that he was not that well known in the mainstream. Don't let them rewrite history for you. Comic historians like to do that a lot. So does the media, especially right now. Still, within comics pre-MCU, Iron Man was decently utilized, but it definitely jumped up after that popularity. A lot of that was thanks to horizontal marketing. Anyway, on to Age of X, which came out in 2011. Here you had an intriguing version of Tony Stark who went by the name of Steel Corpse. Why? Because he had ended up becoming permanently bonded to his Iron Man costume, which was also slowly digesting him. Metal indeed. Seeing the irony in becoming a walking corpse, that's how he decided upon his name. Also, his armor could operate without him, like it had its own directives and would just drag him along for the ride. Tony has a bad history with that happening with his armors. His AI is just too good. He's making them too good. Number 9, clue. You ever have words you just can't say? No matter how many times you hear it, people will say it right to you, and 2 seconds later, it's gone, like dust in the wind. This is one of those for me. Same with Kara and Kara. This is a sad Hulk. An alter ego of the Hulk, not Bruce Banner. This character is described as the Hulk of Hulks. Cause paradoxically, sometimes nothing makes you madder than feeling sad. It is said that this is the Hulk's repressed rage that even he has to always keep in check and inside because he knows that it'll be very dangerous. However, during the Axis storyline event, this alter ego broke free. And because Axis was all about heroes having the alternate moralities, well, this character went on a rampage and was more dangerous than the Hulk ever had been. So you know that means they racked up quite the body count because the Hulk has killed hundreds. I don't care what Marvel says. We've seen the towns destroyed. This character has a more streamlined, doomsday-esque design. It's pretty cool. Number 8, Hawkeye from Old Man Logan. Why hello again, Old Man Logan. We meet again. Not for the last time, I'm sure. Hawkeye is a main character for a decent portion of this story. He fulfills the role of cool side character. This Hawkeye is blind but still able to see in a way that is reminiscent of the Daredevil. He also has a ponytail, and you know you feel cool if you're rocking a ponytail. Hawkeye managed to survive all those years in that supervillain controlled America. That is until he teamed up with Wolverine, aka Logan. Don't do it, it's a bad life choice. If you want a cool archery style road trip companion, then Old Man Hawkeye is for you. Number 7, Scarlet Spider. Now there have been several characters who have taken on this mantle, but we're gonna look at the first for our purposes, and that's Ben Reilly. He debuted as such with that name in Spider-Man number 51 in 1994. That's because it's adjectiveless Spider-Man. It's rare for Spider-Man comics to not have an adjective. However, the concept of Peter having clones, specifically Ben, had been around since the 70s, but that had been intended to be a one-shot and then it ballooned. This Ben heralds back to smack dab in the middle of the Clone Saga. A saga that has a lot of history and is now an infamous case of editorial pushing a story to go on too far. Ben Reilly would prove popular, even if the bait and switch initially pulled of him being the real Spider-Man and Peter Parker was not. In fact, after his death, there was fan backlash to bring him back. Ben Reilly is the first successful Peter Parker clone created by Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, and one of the most stable and well, nice. Not homicidal like some of those other clones out there who made this list as well. The name Ben Reilly comes from both Uncle Ben and Aunt May. The Ben from Uncle Ben and the May from May's maiden name. Fans of Ben admired his attempts to build his own life and fight through the existential crisis that comes with being a clone. Who am I? What's the purpose of my existence? Plus he had a vest. Never underestimate the appeal of a vest. Number 6, Dargo KTOR. Do you like Conan? Do you like Kamandi? Well then get ready for the Thor of Earth 10280. He is the last champion of Midgard, and he is living the most metal life, fighting Loki, who in this universe is a techno sorcerer, which, I mean, how cool does that sound? Now he was a character who became Thor by wielding the hammer, which has happened multiple times throughout Thor's history. People become new Thors. Not that I would call myself that if my name was Dargo KTOR. Is that a Farscape nod? Probably not, but I like to pretend it is because I make my own fun and connections. This costume is great. The spikes and somehow the extension of the wings on the helmet make them cool. He looks like he's heading a heavy metal band. Number 5, X-Apes. The X-Men are monkeys, or rather apes. This, funnily enough, spawned off of the Marvel Zombies universe and event. Basically, they're trying anything. That event was just so popular. This did not turn out to be quite the hit that was, but I mean, few things can. But this universe still has its fans. Actually, everybody in this universe are apes or monkeys or animals of some kind. So really, if you enjoy this concept, it's just the whole universe, and you have people like the Ape Avengers and Dr. Octopus. It's made for a certain type of pun-loving individual. It's a bit niche, but for some it sparks joy. Number 4, Mainframe from the MC2. The MC2 is a fondly remembered alternate universe wherein the boom of superheroes happened 15 years before it actually did in the Marvel 616 universe. So kind of like creating a golden age for Marvel so that they could have legacy characters, because that's what this comic focused on, the next generation of characters, something that DC already specialized in at that time. You see how companies feel about legacy characters is always always changing and shifting. Sometimes they're great and sometimes they're awful. Mainframe is the MC2 version of Vision. He is an android patterned off the brain patterns of Memory Stark. So he has the backstory of Ultron and Age of Avengers. Mainframe is able to manifest in Iron Man's armor and hop from suit to suit, and also to satellite. He tried to make himself the de facto leader of the Avengers right out the gate. The Avengers at first were not aware that he was an AI, but when they found out, they actually still remained his friend and helped him out with all the stuff that he needed, because being nice to AIs means that they don't go crazy and take over the world. Life lesson. Number 3, Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman, aka Ghost Spider, aka we just need to accept that everybody's gonna call her Spider-Gwen. She was conceived of for the Spider-Verse event by Dan Slott, who had been writing Spider-Man for quite some time at that point and become obsessed with the idea of Gwen Stacy as Spider-Man. So the idea was born and would take off and would actually owe a lot of its success to her costume. Again, these things matter, people. The costume blew up and became one of the most cosplayed on the con circuit. This would actually cause a series of variant covers starring Gwen to be launched, one of which would be with Deadpool, which would actually launch the origin of Gwenpool. So we've got 2 characters out of 1. Gwen had an endearingly familiar story and design that resonated with people. She too got a boost from that Spider-Verse movie. That was just a solid movie. Most people came out of that liking most of the characters who were presented in it. Peter B. Parker. Number 2, Weapon Hex. Here we meet another fusion character, this one from Warp World, which we've talked about many times on this channel, but if you're new here are the cliff notes. Gamora, wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, took the souls from the Marvel Universe, put them inside the Soul Gem, and then folded it in half so that all of those souls were then fused together. This created a fusion of X-23, Laura Kinney, and the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff. Here we're looking at a baby being born through experimentation to be the ultimate weapon, but this time instead of it being through science, we're looking at it being through magic and the occult, which of course means there is also some prophecy involved. The result? A really cool fusion, where you've got hex lines all over her body, etc. Think that arc in Teen Titans, the animated series from 2003, where she had like the markings. It's a cool look. And it works surprisingly well as a backstory combo too. See? Magic and science. Thor was right. We found a world where they're one and the same. And number 1, Black Widow from the MCU. We're going to talk about Black Widow for our number 1, but really some would substitute many of the other characters in the MCU for this spot. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has become so large at this point that it just has its own fans and its own continuity that can operate, and for some does operate, entirely independently of comic canon, which is both a good and a bad thing, just like all things. For some, it made the characters more accessible and relatable. This is due to many's preference for a purely visual medium, because comics is also partially visual but also textural. There's, layers. Black Widow emerged for some as a fan favorite. This was because they felt she was fully fleshed out, integral, and had many stories to tell. Some felt that she was underused, as was her potential in this universe. For some, the combination of medium and portrayal made her cooler than the original comic book version. As always, mileage varies, and some will prefer the MCU, some will prefer the comics, and some will enjoy both, or not like both. Different strokes.